A few people who look like hotel staff are casually changing their clothes and arming themselves inside an elevator. In reality, they're undercover agents from an organization called Union on an important mission to retrieve a briefcase with a crucial hard drive. They're being guided by a woman named Roxanne through a voice call from outside the hotel. They break into the targeted room, capture the person with the information, but as soon as they leave the hotel, their getaway van explodes, throwing their entire plan into chaos. In the ensuing mayhem, the agents, led by a guy named Nick Faraday, scramble to find an escape route. One by one, they mysteriously get picked off by a sniper. In the end, with Roxanne watching from afar, Nick and the person they wanted to use as leverage both get killed, and the mission ends in a disastrous failure. The scene shifts to a guy named Mike, who wakes up after spending the night with a woman who used to be his 7th grade teacher. He leaves and heads to his mom's place, who's a pretty cool lady herself. Mike's mother finds out that her son spent the night with his 7th grade teacher. Then she asks about his friend's wedding that's supposed to take place in 2 weeks, saying she needs to know so she can be prepared. Mike then heads to work in his car, which he starts with a screwdriver. He's actually a construction worker who works on tall buildings and skyscrapers. Later that night, Mike is out drinking and having a good time with his friends at a bar. Suddenly, Roxanne, who had failed her previous mission, shows up having coordinated with her boss and seemingly planning to recruit Mike for a new operation. After following Mike, she enters the bar and we realize they know each other from high school. Mike even had a crush on her. Roxanne then takes Mike for a motorcycle ride. They stop somewhere to talk, reminiscing about their romantic past. Mike tells her he loved her, but she left him and he felt abandoned. Mike then plays a song on his phone that reminds them of their romantic times together and hugs her. However, Roxanne injects him with a tranquilizer, knocking him out, and her team takes him to their headquarters in London. Mike wakes up to find himself in London, and Roxanne tells him, "I gave you a sedative and brought you here." Mike insists, "I need to get to work, otherwise I'll get fired." As he steps out of the hotel, he runs into Tom Brennan, the head of the organization, who introduces himself and says, "Hop in the car, I'll take you out for a nice breakfast." However, Mike isn't used to driving on the right side of the road in London and almost gets into a few accidents. Curious about their intentions in recruiting him, Mike asks about the nature of the union. They explain that the union can draw from anywhere and doesn't necessarily only seek out specialists or geniuses. In fact, they might prefer individuals who don't stand out, people like Mike, because their goal is to create a hidden army of versatile individuals. They're particularly interested in the working class rather than the elite or upper class folks. While ordering breakfast, Roxanne shows Mike information about a former CIA agent and analyst who went rogue with classified data. Now they're on the hunt for him and looking for that sensitive information. Next, they give Mike a tour of the organization's building where all their operations take place. Inside the elevator, Roxanne talks to Mike about a woman named Juliet Quinn, who is an information broker selling data on the black market in London. Brennan explains to Mike that in 2 weeks, the stolen information is going up for auction in a black market, and that's where Mike comes into play. He emphasizes the importance of the stolen information, stating it goes beyond just their small organization. It contains sensitive matters that concern every intelligence agency worldwide, and it must never fall into the hands of terrorists. Mike undergoes intense training with members of the organization, including Roxanne, covering everything from combat and shooting to professional driving, stealth, and the concept of trust. There's a pivotal moment when he runs across the roof of a building with his eyes closed, relying solely on Roxanne's voice. After several months of rigorous training, Mike finally meets the organization's standards and is prepared to participate in an operation. He's set to carry out a deal for the organization, tasked with getting a device containing critical information from an individual in exchange for $5 million in cash. Roxanne and the rest of the team are assigned to cover him and keep an eye on him from a distance. As Mike heads to the designated location, another informant mistakenly leads him to the wrong place. The organization realizes that they are not the only ones after the information. Meanwhile, both Roxanne and the other members of the organization rush to reach Mike to prevent any mishap and ensure the mission doesn't fail. Despite the confusion, Mike ends up in a bar where he successfully retrieves the phone containing the information and hands over the cash to a tall, muscular man who is likely connected to the information source. However, as soon as Mike exits the bar, he finds himself targeted by guys wanting to kill him and take the information. Roxanne intervenes and starts shooting at them. In the midst of the gunfight, while Roxanne fiercely battles the attackers, Mike is forced to make a run for it. He escapes into a house where a live television performance is taking place, then emerges outside, only to be confronted by two motorcyclists who were after the information, aiming to kill him. Fortunately, he's saved when the garbage truck, which actually had two members of the organization inside, runs over the two motorcyclists. Later, Mike becomes entangled with a woman who is a highly skilled martial artist. In the struggle, his phone containing the crucial information falls into the water, and she was just about to completely choke Mike. Just in time, Roxanne arrives, and after an intense fight, manages to take the woman down with a decisive blow. After the confrontation, they slip into a garbage collection vehicle where two of their members had secretly hidden and posed as sanitation workers, allowing them to make their escape. Later, when they all gathered together, they realized that the phone was damaged beyond repair because the chip had been destroyed and burned. At Roxanne's suggestion, and with Brennan's agreement, they decided to retrieve the phone from the other groups and organizations that were after the information, as several other parties also had access to it. During a meeting, they discussed that 5 countries, including North Korea, Syria, Iran, and China, were also seeking the information and had sent their terrorists to do so. They managed to gather intel on one of these groups and planned a stealthy nighttime operation to infiltrate their hideout. As they all stealthily moved in to capture the targets and retrieve the information, Mike suddenly came face to face with one of the individuals who was trying to escape. After throwing a hard object at him, he managed to stop him and get hold of the phone containing the information. However, when they returned to their van, they were shocked to discover that their IT specialist, Athena, who was the organization's hacker, had been killed. They found a photo of the organization's building in her clothes. Just as Roxanne was about to tell Brennan that their building was being targeted and that he needed to evacuate, an explosion occurred. They felt a sense of devastation, thinking that the organization and everyone inside, including Brennan, had been lost. Roxanne and Mike then check into a hotel to spend the night and figure out what to do next after the recent events. The next day, Brennan calls Roxanne to let her know he's safe and that they're going to participate in the auction soon. Roxanne and Mike head over to Brennan's location, where they find out that the FBI is putting pressure on them to either acquire the information through the auction or the organization would be finished for good. Brennan assigns Mike and Roxanne a mission. While they're busy with the auction to buy some time, they need to go to the location where the auction is taking place. With the information provided by Foreman, another member of the organization who is also skilled in hacking, they ride their motorcycles to the designated spot. To their surprise, they discover that the person in charge is none other than Juliet, who has been the broker selling the information. Mike and Roxanne then press Juliet to hand over the briefcase containing the information. They go to Juliet's house and take the briefcase from her, but just at that moment, the doorbell rings. Roxanne answers the door and sees Nick Faraday, who is still alive. He explains to Roxanne that the river had carried him away, and he survived the incident. He goes on to tell them that there's a spy inside the organization, and it's none other than Brennan. Nick reveals that Brennan is in cahoots with the terrorists, and if they hand over the information to him, the organization will collapse and everything will be in jeopardy. Ultimately, they decide not to tell Brennan about the bag containing the information. Later, while they are driving, they start arguing about the past. Mike became even more upset, especially when he found out that Roxanne had previously been married to Nick Faraday. Mike blames Roxanne for leaving, saying she should have stayed so they could have been together. Roxanne explains that she had to leave because she needed to go to university to escape her terrible situation. She also blames Mike's father for their breakup. In the end, Mike gets upset and walks away. He then calls his friends from a bar, and they ask him when he's coming back because the wedding is soon. The next day, Mike decides to work with Roxanne again and goes to meet Nick as planned. However, contrary to their expectations, Nick has set them up. During a phone call, he announces that he swapped the briefcase of information with a fake one while they weren't paying attention. He plans to exchange the real one with the terrorists for money. Meanwhile, the FBI surrounds them. Knowing that the briefcase is useless, Roxanne throws it away, and she and Mike jump off the edge of a bridge onto a ship carrying containers. After they tricked everyone and escaped from under the bridge, they cleverly managed to escape from the police and the FBI. Since the police and the FBI are after them, Mike calls his friend who coordinates cargo flights at Newark Airport. He asks for a favor to arrange a safe passage to Istria by hiding in one of the cargo containers on a flight. They spend the entire flight inside a cargo container, and their relationship becomes warmer. Meanwhile, Brennan is taken in by the FBI and is being interrogated because Faraday has framed him. Upon arriving in Istria, they track Nick's location through a device he had, and they find out that he and Juliet are together. Roxanne confronts Nick and disrupts his deal to sell confidential information to an Iranian terrorist. They consider the deal off, and at that moment, Roxanne pulls out a gun. She then drops the briefcase to the ground as Mike picks it up on his motorcycle. Juliet leaves Nick, putting him in a tough spot. Just as Nick is cornered by Roxanne, he attacks and manages to escape. The terrorists, who are after the information, chase Mike on their motorcycles, trying to snatch the briefcase from him. An intense chase ensues, and Mike handles them all skillfully. Meanwhile, Roxanne and Nick are engaged in a shootout by the docks. Roxanne joins Mike in the chase to ensure they don't lose the bag. After defeating the terrorists, Faraday suddenly appears and grabs her, points a gun at Roxanne, and threatens Mike to hand over the briefcase, or he'll shoot her. At that moment, the terrorists arrive in a car and chase after Mike. Nick jumps into a Porsche, and Roxanne also gets into another car to follow him. As Mike continues to flee, he crashes into their car and by sheer luck gets thrown into the trunk of a parked car, losing the briefcase in the process. The trunk closes, and just as the terrorists try to retrieve the briefcase, Nick shows up, grabs it, and runs. The leader of the terrorist group chases Nick in the same car, with Mike trapped in the trunk, leading to another thrilling pursuit. Meanwhile, Mike escapes from the trunk, fights the terrorist driver, throws him out, and takes control of the car. Mike then engages in a car chase with Nick, which ends up with Nick's car plunging into a ravine. Mike jumps out just in time, but Roxanne briefly thinks he's gone. She finds him climbing back up the road, and they continue their pursuit of Nick. They finally corner him by a dock, and just before Nick can hand over the information to the terrorists, Roxanne shoots him and retrieves the briefcase. In the final scene, Mike finally makes it to his friend's wedding, with Roxanne by his side. They are happy, and their relationship seems to be in a great place. They decide to leave the wedding party to spend some quality time together. As they are leaving, they see Brennan, who thanks them for saving the organization and exposing Nick. He expresses his hope and interest in involving Mike and Roxanne in future missions, and the movie ends.